The knock came right on time, brisk and polite, like everything Clarissa did. I opened the door to see her standing there in her pressed linen blazer, one hand on Theo's shoulder, the other holding a white box tied with twine. Mason was just behind, looking distracted, keys dangling from his fingers. "We really appreciate this," Mom Clarissa said, stepping in like she owned the threshold. "It's just a few days, but Theo always sleeps best at your place." "Right, sweetheart." Theo didn't respond. He never did. She handed me the box. "I made you a blend chamomile, valerian, and some other calming herbs. You've sounded so tired lately. 1 cup in the morning, 1 at night, okay?" I nodded, forcing a smile. "Thank you, dear. That's thoughtful." Mason kissed my cheek without really meeting my eyes. "We'll be back Sunday. Call if you need anything." And just like that, they were gone, backing out of the driveway before I could even set the box down. The house fell quiet. I turned to Theo, expecting the usual silence, the way he'd shrink into the corner chair with his puzzle books. But instead, he stood still in the middle of the living room, staring at the tea box in my hands. Then he moved. He crossed the room, grabbed my sleeve with fingers trembling, and looked up at me. "Don't drink the tea, Grandma," he whispered. The words were thin as air. I barely heard them, but I felt them. They froze me to the floor. My hand tightened around the lid of the box. I looked down at him. His mouth didn't move again, but his eyes, those wide, watching eyes, were begging me to believe him. I carried the box to the kitchen and set it next to the kettle. The water was already hot. I poured it out. Steam rose soft and floral. I watched it curl into the air, breathing in nothing. Theo stood by the doorway, still silent. Still watching. "Come sit," I said, pulling out a chair. "You're going to tell me everything you know." He nodded once. Then he reached for the floorboard beneath the table. That evening, Clarissa FaceTimed, as I expected. Her image flickered on the screen, sun-kissed from whatever coastal resort they were lounging at, cocktail in hand. "How's Theo?" she asked, voice syrupy. "He's doing fine," I said, letting my words blur ever so slightly. Her eyes flicked to the mug in my hand. I'd filled it with water, but I lifted it like tea and took a slow, fake sip. "Been drinking the blend I gave you?" "Mm-hmm," I hummed. "Real soothing. Good," she said, smiling just a little too wide. "Helps keep the nerves steady." We exchanged a few more pleasantries. She asked nothing about Theo directly. Then she ended the call with, "Make sure you get plenty of rest." When the screen went dark, I set the cup down and stared at it like it might spit. Theo hadn't moved much since earlier. He sat on the floor near the kitchen table. Legs crossed the stuffed owl he always carried, resting in his lap. "You want to talk now?" I asked softly. He looked up. Then slowly, deliberately, he crawled forward on hands and knees and pressed his small fingers between 2 warped floorboards. One of them lifted with a creak. Beneath it, wrapped in a folded napkin, were papers. A second later, he slid out a thumb drive and a crumpled prescription label. "She leaves things out when I'm with her," he whispered. "She thinks I don't see. She thinks I don't understand." He held the items out to me, his hand steady despite his voice. I kept what I could, hid it here, so she wouldn't find it. I took the bundle gently and laid it on the table. "Why haven't you ever spoken before?" He shrank back slightly, then straightened his back like he'd been practicing bravery. "She told me bad things would happen. She said I'd get sent away, and you'd go to sleep and not wake up." I sat down hard. "Have you always understood us everything?" He nodded. "I taught myself to read when I was 6. From cereal boxes, your books, the captions on TV." My heart cracked wide. He'd been watching, waiting, hiding, surviving. Theo looked up at me, eyes no longer blank, but burning. "There's more hidden upstairs." I waited until Theo was asleep before I opened the box of tea. Each packet was sealed in crisp parchment, tied with a neat bow. I opened one carefully and held it to my nose. Chamomile had a sweet, apple-like scent. This didn't. It smelled sharp metallic like crushed aspirin and old roots. Something was wrong. I double-wrapped it in a plastic sandwich bag, then placed the rest back neatly in the box. The next morning, I slipped out early, telling Theo I'd be back shortly. I walked 2 doors down to Dr. Yates' cottage, my hands tight around the sealed bag. His porch creaked as always, and the man himself opened the door in a robe and house slippers, blinking behind thick glasses. "I need you to test something," I said. He looked at me for a beat too long, then opened the door wider. "Come in." He didn't ask questions. He just took the bag and nodded once. "I'll need a few hours." Back home, Theo was sitting on the couch, reading a novel he must have pulled from the hall shelf. His finger traced the words as his lips moved soundlessly. "You read that?" I asked. "Twice," he said, without looking up. "How long have you been reading?" "Since I was 6. She never noticed. She meant Clarissa, and I believed it. If she thought he was broken, she never would have seen the mind behind those eyes. He closed the book and turned to me. "She talks a lot when she thinks no one's listening. One time she said, 'If you start forgetting things, no one will trust you anymore. That's when it's safe to change the paperwork.'" My stomach clenched. She said it to Dad. I was on the stairs. They didn't hear me. I sat beside him, staring at the cold fireplace. They wanted me confused, lost, out of the way. This wasn't just about the tea. It was about my name, my home, my rights. Theo shifted closer and whispered, "I heard her say something about Sunday too." I turned toward him slowly. She said, "By Sunday afternoon it'll be done." Dr. Yates called just after lunch. I stepped into the hallway and closed the door softly behind me. "It's not chamomile," he said, without preamble. "There are sedatives mixed in. Low doses carefully measured. Enough to dull awareness, slow reaction time, and interfere with short-term memory, if taken consistently." My grip tightened around the phone. Dangerous. Over time. Yes. Especially for someone your age. "It's designed to look like decline, not poisoning." I thanked him and hung up, standing there longer than I needed to. Pieces began sliding into place, names I'd struggled to recall. Keys I'd misplaced, moments when my thoughts had felt wrapped in cotton. I had blamed age. I had blamed grief. I had blamed myself. That afternoon, I pulled out an old ledger from the bottom drawer of my desk and opened to the first blank page. I wrote the date at the top. Then I wrote everything. Every call from Clarissa. Every time she mentioned the tea. Every odd comment about rest, about slowing down, about how these things happen. By evening, the pattern was undeniable. At 6 o'clock sharp, my phone rang. "Did you drink your tea?" Marvania Clarissa asked, her voice light. "Yes," I said, letting my words drag just enough. "I think so. Good. Morning and night. Remember, consistency matters." After the call ended, I wrote the time down and underlined it twice. She called again at 9. Theo watched me from the armchair as I set the phone aside. His head tilted slightly the way he did when he was thinking hard. "You're different today," he said. "How so?" "You're starting to look like yourself again." The words landed heavier than anything Dr. Yates had said. I sat across from him and reached for his hand. It was warm, steady. "How long have I seemed not myself?" I asked. He hesitated, then answered carefully, "A while. You forgot little things." Then bigger ones. She told Dad it was normal. I nodded slowly. I could see it now, the way concern had been planted before the symptoms fully bloomed. Sunday afternoon, I thought. I closed the ledger, slid it into the drawer, and stood up straighter than I had in weeks, already knowing that whatever Clarissa expected to find when she came back, it wouldn't be the woman she thought she had broken. The next morning, while I peeled carrots for soup, Theo shuffled into the kitchen, holding a folded sheet of paper in both hands. His eyes were steady, but his shoulders were tense. "I printed this a while ago," he said, "from her email." I dried my hands on a towel and took the paper gently. It had a faint crinkle down the middle and ink that had slightly smudged near the edges. I opened it. M. Cole. Signs of cognitive decline progressing. Recommend guardianship transfer within 3 months. Possible care options attached. It was signed with the letterhead of a private home care agency based 2 counties away. A woman's name, Clarissa's email address, and a meeting date were printed along the bottom. 3 weeks ago. She left her laptop open. I remembered her password, Theo said. She used my birthday. She always thinks I don't pay attention. I sat down hard in the kitchen chair, the paper trembling slightly in my hand. I read it again. And again. Words swam: guardianship, decline, transfer. It was a roadmap to remove me. She talked to someone about moving you somewhere, Theo added. Said you wouldn't fight it if you didn't remember where you were. I looked up at him, heart knocking against my ribs. Did your dad know? Theo hesitated. He asked questions. But she told him it was for your safety. That you were slipping. The weight of it all sat heavy on my chest. They'd been laying the groundwork. The tea, the phone calls, the gentle nudges. This wasn't about helping me, it was about replacing me. I reached for my ledger and added a new entry: printed document, date retrieved, agency name. Theo sat across from me and waited. I reached out, touched his cheek. You saved me. He blinked. You listened. We didn't speak for a while. We didn't have to. Later that night, while we packed away laundry, Theo tugged at a thread loose in the blanket and said quietly, she told someone on the phone they needed you confused by Sunday. That you'd be easy to move after that. My hands stopped folding. Sunday wasn't far. Theo said it again that night, quieter this time, as if the words themselves were dangerous. By Sunday afternoon, it'll be done. I stood at the sink, staring at my reflection in the dark window. Sunday was when they were coming back. Sunday was when Clarissa expected the fog to be thick enough, my thoughts slow enough, my resistance gone. She hadn't rushed this. That was the part that unsettled me most. Every dose had been measured. Every call had been timed. The tea wasn't meant to knock me out. It was meant to make me manageable. I dried my hands and reached for the phone. Lena answered on the second ring. We'd known each other for over 20 years, long enough that I didn't need to explain my voice when it shook. I need you to come by Sunday evening, I said. Quietly. I'll explain when you get here. There was a pause. Then are you safe right now for the moment? Then I'll be there, she said. And Marvenia, don't drink anything you didn't pour yourself. After I hung up, Theo was watching me from the hallway. He didn't ask what I was doing. He didn't need to. We sat at the kitchen table and laid everything out. The tea box, the printed document, the notes in my ledger. I told him about Lena, about what would happen if Clarissa followed through with her plan. They'll think you don't understand, I said. They'll think I don't remember. Theo nodded slowly. That's what she always thinks. An idea took shape between us, quiet and careful. I would let Clarissa believe the tea had worked. I would sound confused on the phone. Forget small things. Repeat myself. Enough to make her comfortable. She needs to feel in control, I said. That's when people make mistakes. Theo's fingers curled against the edge of the table. And me. You stay exactly the way she expects, I told him. Silent. Invisible. He held my gaze, then nodded once. That night, I moved the tea box back where Clarissa had left it, set my ledger in a drawer, and practiced looking uncertain in the hallway mirror, already preparing for the part I would play when Sunday arrived. The next morning, we began. I sat on the couch with my hair slightly mussed and robe half-tied, holding an empty teacup. Theo walked into the room and gave me the cue. I blinked at him. Now, what was your name again, dear? He didn't flinch. Just sat in the corner like he always used to, silent, folding paper over and over until it formed something small and neat. I tried again. Did I eat breakfast yet? Or was that yesterday? Theo gave a tiny nod of approval. In the kitchen, I let a spoon clatter loudly to the floor, then stared at it for too long. I murmured my shopping list to the faucet and pretended to forget what room I was in when I returned. When I tripped over my own name, Theo laughed quietly. "Too much," he whispered. "Fair," I said, and smiled. She'd noticed that. We refined the act until the cracks were just enough believable. Harmless. Expected. That afternoon, Theo crept behind the bookshelf and retrieved the small black recorder we'd hidden there the day before. He brought it to me with careful fingers, then pressed the button. I sat at the table and played the part of Clarissa, my voice cold and clipped. She won't fight anything. Once she's in, she's in. Theo stood across from me, his chin high. "I can talk, and I recorded you." His voice was strong, steady. Then he pressed stop. We tested it again, and again. My hands shook the third time I turned it off. "Do you want to rest?" he asked. "No," I said. "I want to be ready." That evening we made meatloaf, simple, familiar. Theo peeled carrots while I shaped the loaf. He hummed something under his breath, a tune I hadn't heard in years. It took me a minute to recognize it. It was the lullaby I used to hum when he was small, before the silence, before everything else. When the timer dinged, he set the table without being asked. He moved with the calm of someone who knew what was coming. I folded the napkins and said, "Tomorrow we play our part." He nodded and whispered, "I'm not afraid of them anymore." Their car pulled into the driveway just after 2. I was already in position, seated on the couch with my cardigan buttoned wrong and my glasses perched too low on my nose. Theo sat on the floor with his blocks head down, silent as ever. The front door opened. Clarissa came in first, her suitcase wheels bumping over the threshold. She paused when she saw me, eyes scanning quickly my posture, my face, the cup on the side table. "There you are," she said brightly. "Oh, Mom, you look exhausted." I smiled, slow and uncertain. "Did you just get here?" Mason hovered behind her, his expression tight. "We've been gone 4 days. 4. I repeated, testing the word. "That sounds right." Clarissa relaxed. I could see it in the way her shoulders dropped, the way she slipped out of her shoes and sat without asking. She talked about the resort, about the weather, about how Theo had been so good while they were gone, never once addressing him directly. Then she leaned back and said almost casually, "I've been thinking we should set up the spare room for you. Somewhere comfortable. You won't need to worry about your checkbook anymore. It'll all be taken care of." Mason shifted. "Clarissa." She waved him off, still smiling at me. "It's just practical." I nodded vaguely, letting my gaze drift past her shoulder. Theo stood up. He walked to the bookshelf without hesitation, reached behind the row of hardcovers, and pulled out the recorder. He held it up in both hands. "That recorder's been running for hours," he said clearly. The room went still. Clarissa's smile collapsed, replaced by something sharp and frightened. "What is this?" she demanded. Theo didn't look at her. He pressed a button. Clarissa's voice filled the room, calm, calculated, unmistakable, talking about control, about timing, about how confusion made things easier. Mason sank into the chair like his legs had given out. I stood up, then straightening my cardigan, feeling steadier than I had in weeks. "That's not all," I said already, reaching for the folder in the drawer as Theo met my eyes and nodded once, and I realized the next step would change everything. Lena came by the next morning with her briefcase and a fire in her eyes I hadn't seen in years. She listened carefully, took copies of the documents, and made a call before she even left my kitchen. By Tuesday, the lab results came in. Dr. Yates had written a full report. The tea contained 2 types of sedatives, both in microdoses, but dangerous with repeated use. Enough to mimic dementia. Enough to erase weeks of clarity if no one was paying attention. Clarissa's emails did the rest. Theo had memorized her login. Lena printed the threads her self-lines, where Clarissa outlined her timeline, hinted at financial motivations, and asked questions about guardianship forms and elder care loopholes. Mason sat across from me on the porch 2 days later, his face pale and tired. I saw things he said quietly. I just believed her. She always made it sound like she was helping. She wasn't, I said. And you didn't stop her. He didn't argue. He just nodded, tears sliding down without effort or sound. Clarissa was charged with attempted elder abuse and child endangerment. The term coercive control was used more than once. And when it came time to testify, Theo stood in the courtroom, shoulders square and voice calm. My name is Theo James Cole, he said clearly. I'm not mute. I stopped talking because I was afraid. But I'm not afraid now. Lena handed over the recordings. The judge listened without interruption. The emails were submitted. So were the T results, my journal, Dr. Yates's notes. The courtroom was quiet when the ruling came down. Full guardianship of Theo granted to me. Clarissa was to have no contact until further review. Outside under the wide courthouse sky, Theo held my hand and didn't let go. You did it, I whispered. He looked up at me and said, We both did. Later that night, we sat by the fireplace. I made tea, real tea peppermint this time, and we didn't speak for a long while. He rested his head against my arm and finally asked, What happens now? 6 months passed without a whisper from Clarissa. Theo and I sat side by side on the old wooden pier behind the library. Our fishing lines dipped in the still lake. The breeze was warm for early spring, and the sun shimmered against the water, like it had been waiting for us to return. He leaned back on his elbows, his sneakers tapping against the wood. My teacher said our next project is about how silence can be used as protection, he said. I picked it because I think I know a little bit about that. I smiled and glanced at him. His voice was stronger now, fuller. He no longer paused to check the room before he spoke. She said, Most people think silence is weakness, he continued. But I think it's just waiting, like a tide. You don't hear it rising, but then it's there. The rod tugged slightly in my hand, but I didn't reel in. Not yet. You've grown, I said. You too. We fell quiet again, but not the way we used to. It wasn't a silence stuffed with fear or secrets. It was rest, like we could finally afford stillness. Theo adjusted his line and asked, Do you think people can change? I looked out across the lake. A duck moved along the far edge, barely disturbing the water. My fingers found the warm mug of thermos tea beside me. Ginger and lemon balm this time, chosen by Theo himself. I think people show you who they are, I said slowly. And sometimes they change when they have to. But most of the time they change when they're caught. Theo nodded. So not really change, just reacting. Sometimes reacting is all they know. A fish tugged again, and this time he stood reeling it in with more patience than I expected. The line pulled tight, then loosened. He laughed as the fish broke the surface, silver and strong. I reached for the net without being asked. We moved as a team now, quiet, unhurried, and sure. Behind us, the town clock chimed 4 times, and the lake kept holding the light.